The village always woke before sunrise, and by the time the first light touched the horizon, the old fisherman was already at sea. His boat was small and worn, its paint chipped and faded from years of salt and sun. Each morning he cast his net with quiet patience, his movements steady, almost ritualistic. The villagers often watched from the shore, whispering among themselves, for what followed was always the same. The first fish he caught, whether small or large, he would gently lift from the net and return to the water. No one understood why. Some laughed, saying he was a fool to waste food when his life was so modest. Others shrugged and assumed it was nothing more than superstition. But the fisherman never explained. His weathered face, lined with time and grief, revealed little, and his silence only deepened the mystery. Children sometimes dared each other to ask him, yet none ever did. They were unnerved by the stillness in his eyes, a look that seemed to hold secrets too heavy for words. Despite the whispers, he never changed his habit. The first catch always went back into the sea. After that, he would fish as usual, filling his basket slowly and returning home with enough to survive. There was no wealth in his work, no surplus to sell, but he never complained. He lived alone in a small wooden house by the shore, his days marked by the same rhythm, his evenings spent mending nets by the dim glow of a lantern. The villagers often wondered if he was lonely, if he longed for company. Some pitied him, thinking his life was one of emptiness, but there was a quiet strength in the way he carried himself, as though his solitude was chosen rather than imposed. Still, even strength cannot mask sorrow forever. At times, when he looked out over the sea, his expression softened into something fragile, almost breaking. Those who noticed quickly turned away, unwilling to intrude on a grief they did not understand. To the children, he was a figure of curiosity. To the adults, he was a reminder of life's mysteries that could not be explained. And to himself, he was simply a man keeping a promise, one that no one else knew about. Every released fish was more than an act of habit. It was a memory, a burden, and a prayer carried silently on the tides. The sea held his secret, and for years he let it remain there, unspoken. But secrets have a way of surfacing, and the day would soon come when his ritual would no longer go unnoticed by the innocent eyes of a child who refused to accept silence as an answer. One morning, as the fisherman prepared his nets, a small shadow lingered near the pier. It was a boy from the village, no more than 10 years old, with wide eyes that carried both mischief and wonder. Unlike the others, he did not run away when the old man's gaze swept toward him. Instead, he stood firmly, clutching a piece of driftwood like a sword, watching every movement with quiet fascination. When the fisherman rowed out to sea, the boy followed along the edge of the shore, keeping pace until the boat reached the open water. From there, he sat on a rock and waited. Hours passed before the fisherman returned with his modest basket of fish. As he stepped onto the pier, the boy finally spoke. "I saw you," he said softly. "You let the first fish go." The fisherman paused, his hands stilled on the oars, and for a moment, the only sound was the creak of the wooden boat against the dock. The boy's words were simple, yet they carried a weight that pierced through the old man's silence. "Why do you do that?" the boy pressed, his voice unshaken. The fisherman lowered his eyes, lifting the basket from the boat without reply. He hoped his quietness would be enough to end the questions, but the boy followed him down the pier, step for step. "Is it bad luck to keep the first one? Did someone tell you to do it? My father says you're wasting food. He says you must be foolish." The boy's words cut deeper than he intended. The fisherman had heard those judgments many times before, from the mouths of grown men who thought they understood everything about survival. Yet coming from the boy, the questions felt different. They weren't spoken with cruelty, but with innocence, the kind that does not allow mysteries to remain mysteries. At his small wooden house, the fisherman set down his basket. The boy stood at the doorway, waiting. For the first time in many years, the old man felt the weight of eyes that did not mock but sought truth. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. The words, heavy and unspoken, tangled in his chest. "Go home," he finally said, his voice rough. But the boy did not move. Instead, he sat cross-legged by the doorway, stubborn as the tide itself. "I won't go until you tell me." That night, long after the boy's parents had called for him and the stars hung over the quiet sea, the fisherman sat inside his home, staring at the dark water beyond his window. He knew the questions would not stop, and for the first time in decades, he felt the past stirring, rising like a storm he had long tried to bury. The next morning, The boy was already waiting by the pier before the fisherman arrived. His small legs dangled over the edge as he hummed softly, the kind of tune only a child could invent. When the fisherman's boat touched the dock, the boy stood, determined, his eyes fixed not on the basket of fish but on the man who carried it. "You can't send me home again," the boy said quietly. "I want to know." The fisherman's weathered hands tightened on the net rope. His instinct was to turn away, to hide once more behind silence. But something in the boy's voice softened him. There was no mockery, no judgment, only an earnest need to understand. And perhaps, he thought, the time for hiding had long passed. He set the basket down and sat on the edge of the pier. The boy joined him, leaning forward, expectant. The fisherman looked out across the sea, its waves glittering in the morning sun, and let out a long, weary breath. "Many years ago," he began slowly, "I had a son about your age. He loved the sea more than anything. He wanted to learn how to fish, how to row, how to read the sky. I told him he was too young, but his spirit was strong. One morning, he begged me to let him come with me. Against my better judgment, I said yes." His voice wavered, and for a moment he stopped, his eyes fixed on the horizon. The boy waited, patient and still. The sea was calm when we left. The fisherman continued, "But storms rise without warning. By the time we saw the clouds, it was too late. The waves struck hard, the boat tipped, and my boy," his words faltered, caught in the tightness of his throat. "My boy was taken." The boy's wide eyes shimmered, his small hands gripping the edge of the pier. The fisherman closed his eyes, the memory heavy as an anchor. "I searched for him until my arms gave out. I screamed his name into the wind, but the sea does not return what it claims. When I finally came back to shore, I carried nothing but grief. Since that day, I could not bear to take the first gift the sea offered me. So I return it, every time. It is my way of remembering him, and of forgiving myself." The boy's lips trembled as he whispered, "You're not foolish." For the first time in years, the fisherman felt his chest loosen, as though the tide within him had shifted. The boy's words were simple, but they carried the power of release. He had shared the truth, and with it, a burden had lifted. The waves rolled gently against the shore, and the fisherman's gaze softened. For once, the first catch was not only a release into the sea, was a release within himself. A quiet peace settled over him, as though his son's spirit, carried by the waters, had finally returned home. Some stories live in silence until the right moment arrives to free them. The fisherman's ritual was never about superstition or waste, it was about love, loss, and the courage to let go. In his act of release, he discovered that the weight of grief can transform into wisdom, and that holding on is not always strength. Sometimes, strength is in surrender. Perhaps each of us carries a first catch of our own, something we must release to find peace. If this story touched you, share it with someone who needs it, and join us by liking, commenting, and subscribing.